It's really a thrill for me to look around the room and see all of these faces here. One of the things that I get most excited about, especially as someone who's spent most of my career in the world of education, is in true adult learning fashion. The idea today is that you're going to learn just as much from each other as you're going to learn from the presenters. So we have a lot of workshops and conversations intentionally built in, because one of our goals is for you to talk to some of your peers and counterparts who are working in different industries, different types of organizations, but I think what you're going to find over and over again is dealing with very similar problems. And the problems, not surprisingly, are around this challenge of leadership in the era of digital transformation. So I'm going to be talking using words like era and ages and mass extinction events. I'm going to mix in some time travel this morning. I'm going to be part paleontologist, part sci-fi writer, and a big part psychologist in this presentation. So let's dive in. Here's what I'm going to be telling you. We are in the age of the customer, and I'm going to give a refresher of what that means and what we talked about last year. As we enter this new age, we're going to be witnessing a mass extinction event, but the good news is it can be avoided. And I would go so far as to saying the fact that you're actually in this room physically makes your chances of your organization avoiding that event really high. But avoiding it is going to require adaptation, which, as we all know, is extraordinarily hard. The problem isn't technology or money, and I don't want to poo-poo those things. Those are critical factors in digital transformation, obviously, but there has been a shift. The problem is humans. Surprise, surprise. I've got a new method, a tool or a framework that I'm going to share with you that we've been talking about a lot lately, and I hope it's something that you can bring back to work with you tomorrow and start to apply to the work day to day. And we're going to use a real example to talk about it, how that framework works, and then you're going to learn from each other. So that's what we're going to talk about. Let's get started. So the age of the customer. This is a refresh from last year, but if you weren't here last year, I can bring you up to speed really quickly. This is some research that we shared from Forrester, who declared that we're officially in or entering into the age of the customer. And what they're saying is we've moved through a few distinct periods of time in our economy, from the age of manufacturing at the beginning of the last century to the age of distribution, mass transit, mass media, to the age of information. Obviously, when we entered the 90s and the advent of the internet, the age of information was upon us. And that was a really critical time in technology, obviously, but a different kind of challenge than what we're dealing with today with the age of the customer. The age of the information was really about giving your consumers, your customers, access to your enterprise, to your information, to your services, but in a way that you very much controlled. And power still resided with the organization. And that's different in the age of the customer. When we saw the advent of the smartphone in 2009 or so, that really did create a seed change for how we behave as consumers and what it means for organizations, because it really puts a lot of power into the hands of the consumer. And we like to cut this a little thinner. Since 2007, when we first got these phones in our pockets, there was an acceleration toward 2014, which we think of as the mobile tipping point. This was a really significant time because this was the first time that humans spent the majority of their time on the internet accessing it via their phone, via a mobile device. So it happened really fast, and once it happened, it's only accelerated since then. And we all see this in our everyday lives. We have our computers in our pockets all the time. We're constantly accessing services. We're ordering food. We're making appointments. We're booking flights. We're doing financial transactions. We're learning, all of those things. And as that acceleration has occurred, our impatience has gone way, way up. We expect the answer immediately. We expect the service immediately. We want a frictionless experience on this phone because we don't have much time, and that's why we're doing it on the phone in the first place. And the really key thing is, once we entered that mobile tipping point, customers' expectations also changed in a different way. And what we talked about last year, and is still true, is once someone is accessing your enterprise or your organization through their phone, their comparison set has really changed. So when someone's doing a financial transaction on their phone, they're not comparing that experience to that of another bank or another financial institution. When they're on the phone having that experience, they're comparing that experience to everything else on their phone, which includes Facebook and Amazon and Uber and experiences that have obviously had tens of billions of dollars invested behind them, and that's the bar for the experience that you need to be able to deliver. So it's a huge challenge, and it's really created a shift. If you think about moving from one age to the other, again, talking like a paleontologist, the age of information was about access and scale, making sure that your internet services were up, they were secure, they were highly scalable, you had the right content and the right information at the right place. The age of the customer is about adaptability and speed. Because as things have accelerated and our impatience has only grown, we all know that consumers are very, very fussy, very, very challenging to deal with. Their expectations change all the time. And so those who are going to thrive in this new age are the ones who are going to be highly adaptable and really fast, because you have to be ready to change along with your customer. And so as you move from one age to the next, as history will tell us, some species really start to suffer. And we're already seeing it. Since 2000, over 50% of the Fortune 500 companies have gone away. They've either been acquired, they've merged with a competitor, or they've declared bankruptcy. Insight Ventures actually goes on one step further and says, at the current rate of churn, 75% of today's S&P 500 will be gone within 10 years. And I know that sounds incredible and impossible. 75% of today's S&P 500 being gone in 10 years. But if you look at what's actually happened since 2000, that's not so hard to believe. If half of the Fortune 5s are already gone. So a huge, huge mass extinction event that's about to occur. And as McKinsey puts it really well, mass extinction events don't just happen for no reason. There's always a cause, and the current cause is digital transformation. The ones who are going to go extinct are the ones who are going to be unable to adapt to this new age. And the ones who are going to thrive and survive are those that are going to be able to adapt. And this isn't because of technology. I don't think anyone's predicting that these companies are going to go away because their technology fails. I think it's about their ability to adapt. Adaptation is a really, really hard thing. We know species who avoid extinction have the ability to do it, but it's incredibly, incredibly hard. One piece of evidence that I think is really interesting right now is in the research, it shows that 90% of leaders and executives like you agree that digital transformation in their enterprise has to happen. So 90% are already there. They're not head in the sand about this. But more than half of those surveyed believe that all of their organizations, or most of their organizations' transformation projects are going to fail. More than half believe that the stuff that they're working on is going to fail. That's a huge statement. What's going to prevent it for businesses to actually make this adaptation and transformation? Two simple things: investment and change. And I'll give you a hint. The second one is the big one. Our ability to change, our ability to adapt the way that we work, the way that we think, the way that we behave, our biases, that's the thing that's really going to prevent organizations from transforming. It's no longer the challenge of investment. And that's different. GoKart is now in our 10th year of operation. We didn't know it back in 2009, but we've been working in the era of digital transformation this whole time. We just didn't know that's what it was called. But in those early years, and I would say up until just even a few years ago, getting enterprises to recognize the fact that they had to invest in digital was a challenge. We've had many battles with our clients side by side, going to the CFO, trying to convince them to release the capital necessary just to kind of catch up on the mobile side of things, on basic digital services, on an upgraded tech stack. That was a challenge for a long time, and it's not that it's gone away. It's never easy to get those kinds of investment dollars, but it really has changed, and we're seeing it in the research too. This year, companies around the world are expected to spend north of $1.3 trillion on digital transformation. That's about 18% up from last year, and that number is expected to double again in the next 3 years. So within just a few years, companies are going to be spending north of $2 trillion on digital transformation, which is great. They're investing. However, what you see here is that the lion's share of the dollars are still going to technology and operations. It has to happen. There's massive technology problems that need to be addressed, particularly in enterprises that were designed for the age of information and not for the age of the customer. There has to be a tear out and replacement of the tech stack in a lot of different organizations. But there's a whole bunch of different areas too, and that's part of what I'm trying to communicate this morning. I think there's a risk of organizations only investing in one part of the problem and not seeing the broader challenge of transformation. What is successful digital transformation? It's not just about updating your tech stack. Forrester did some great research, and what I like about the research that they did is they studied the companies that they believe were doing it well. So who are those players that we think are really getting some traction in digital transformation, and what are they working on? They're working on these 5 things. They're working on the technology, and we see that in the investment dollars, but there's 4 other pillars that they're also focused on: culture, talent, metrics, and structure. And all of those things are really different than the technology problems. I know it's easy to look at metrics and say, yeah, well, that's a tech issue too. But when you kind of dive deeper into the research, what they're saying, it's not just about big data and having data scientists around. It is about an organizational shift in how we even think about data. Are we making decisions based on data? Are we trying to take data and actually convert it into real insights that we can feed back to our product group to solve customer problems? That's a mindset shift. And so what you really realize is that 4 of the 5 things here, culture, talent, metrics, and structure, aren't tech issues. They require human change. They require us as people to start to change and work differently. And I think a really good counterpoint to this is why I think startups have such a huge advantage. You know, when we look at startups and go, why are they going so fast? How do these disruptions keep happening in industry after industry? I really believe strongly they don't win on tech. I mean, it happens sometimes that a startup has just such compelling technology that they blow away others in the space. But in this time, in the era of the customer, it's not really the technology that wins, it's their ability to use that technology to do something different and do it in a way that really meets an unmet need for a consumer. They don't need to worry about these other things. They don't have to worry about transforming their culture. They don't have to worry about transforming their talent or upgrading it. They don't have to worry about a mindset around data and metrics. They don't have to worry about structure. They just get to grow. They have a problem and they get to grow. Now, sooner or later, every startup who's successful and gets up their S-curve of growth is faced with the very same problems as any enterprise. And you see it again and again. Startups get to a certain point and then they plateau. And they realize that they've fallen victim to the same things that they used to laugh about with big enterprises. They too need to transform. Unfortunately, no one's exempt from having to think about this. We have to address digital transformation, and the reason why is if you believe that we're now in a different age, the age of the customer, and if you believe customers are impatient and they're going to be changing their taste rapidly and they're going to be comparing you with everything else on their phone or other device, then you have to accelerate your company's ability to meet those customer expectations. That's the requirement. How do you accelerate your ability to meet customer expectations? That's really the underlying idea of digital transformation. Taking all 5 of those pillars and changing them so that you're in this new age and ready to go. So I want to talk about how you might do that. And I want to share, our goal is to always try and share methods and tools that you can actually use tomorrow when you go back to work. And I'll start this out by saying I'm not a big fan of business books. When I finished graduate school, I swore I would never read another business book as long as I lived. Most of them are not all that useful. They might inspire you for a day or two, but they're not very practical. And this one is an exception. And I wish he was here, but the great thing about GoKart is we get to work with really smart clients like you, and it was actually a client that turned us on to this framework, and we thought, even though this wasn't written for digital transformation, this is perfect for digital transformation. So this is Vijay Govindarajan. He's a professor at the Tuck School of Business at Dartmouth and author of a current bestseller, The 3-Box Solution. And some or many of you may have read this book, and if you have, I apologize for going through a primer here. For those of you who haven't read it, in true GoKart fashion, I'm going to give you this book in 3 minutes, and then you can pretend that you read it. But I think this is a really, really helpful framework, and we're already using it in our own business planning to think about things. So here are the 3 boxes, according to Govindarajan. I'm going to call him VJ from now on. Box 1, really simple. Protect the present. This is about your core business. This is about making the donuts day in and day out. And this is a critical area for investing in digital transformation. This is all about how do we do what we do better, faster, more cost efficiently, in a more scalable fashion. How do we stay with the times and outpace, out-hustle, outrun our competitors? And make no mistake, this is a huge area of need for digital transformation, taking your core business and just moving it forward. But this is about a very different mindset. People who are operating in box one have very clear measurables, very clear deliverables, very clear incentive structures, and very clear accountabilities. They have to make things work day in and day out. What people struggle with, what most organizations struggle with, is box three, which is about building the future. So if box one is about what we would call linear innovation, just doing what you do a little better every day with the occasional step change, linear innovation, box three is about nonlinear innovation. These are the big breakout ideas. These are the things that nobody saw coming. This is disruptive innovation. And his point in this is that this is where most businesses fail to focus. They're so busy operating the core and making the core better that they forget to think about what's going to be true 5 to 10 years from now and start working on it now. You know the old saying that the best time to plant a tree is 10 years ago? That's this very idea. Who is working in box three right now and playing around with and experimenting with nonlinear ideas that could become critical to your organization's future? My favorite part of this, and what I'm really going to focus on in this conversation, is box two. That's about forgetting the past. And I think this is really kind of the breakthrough aha in Vijay's work, calling this out, that what organizations need to do is be more intentional and more purposeful about forgetting the past and actually putting a name to the things that inhibit growth or might block innovation. So I want to go into this a little deeper and give you examples of what I mean in box two. It begins with this idea that, as Picasso said, every act of creation is first an act of destruction. So rather than just blue skying box three ideas, based on existing or emerging technologies or gut feel, what Vijay recommends is first do an ongoing and very intentional box two exercise, which is about naming the things that hold you back. So one of these questions would be, what are the weak signals from the future? What are the things that you're seeing out there that are fringe ideas right now that might or might not come into focus and actually disrupt your industry or your business? I would say that blockchain 3 or 4 years ago would have been a weak signal from the future. Some people were hearing it and starting to work on it. Others dismissed it. And those that began to play around with it and experiment and listen to that weak signal and try and dial it in are further ahead than their competitors right now. They were paying attention to that weak signal. And this is the one I really love. What are the sacred beliefs in your organization or your industry that need to be challenged? I grew up in the world of higher ed, and higher ed has many sacred beliefs. Only professors can teach. Teaching occurs in a classroom. The only way to validate that someone learned something is to give them a degree. All of those are unwritten sacred beliefs that really hold back innovation in that sector. And I know that every one of you has these in your industry and in your company. And it may not just be an industry-wide thing. It might be sacred beliefs about, we don't do that. That's not our business. That's not what we do. That's someone else's job. Third, what incentives and policies slow innovation? Are you operating in an organization that has incentive compensation specifically tied to quarterly earnings, for example, or for not breaking rules? Do the regulators have such a strong hand that you really just can't get any new idea off the ground? In almost any industry, that's true, but it needs to be named. And if you can name it, then you can have a conversation about it as opposed to just accepting it as fact. Really importantly, what should we stop doing? That's a critical part of box two. What are the things that we've always done that, if we're honest with ourselves, maybe we should not do anymore? He uses a great case study of IBM, who made a huge decision to start to divest massive parts of their business that were actually still growing and profitable, but they realized that they were going to block them from getting to the box three innovation that they needed to work on. So they sold them off, they took that capital and they reinvested it into some box three solutions, such as Watson. And then finally, how are you going to avoid the 3 traps? And I'll give you what each of these traps are. The first is the complacency trap. So the complacency trap is this idea that to win in the future, all we need to do is what we did today. All we need to do is what we did yesterday. We just keep doing what we're doing. We're successful right now, and that's going to continue to be true. Complacency. Second, that I think we see a lot at GoKart, especially as we do new product creation, new business creation, is the cannibalization trap. This is the idea that those working in box 1, working in the core, become threatened. If a box 3 idea has a legitimate chance of actually taking customers and diverting revenue or sales away from box 1, and I'm incented to succeed in box 1, I'm threatened. And so whether actively or subconsciously, I'm going to try and kill that thing. I don't want it to go because it's a threat to me in box 1. So the cannibalization trap, I think, is really, really powerful. And then finally, the competency trap. We're amazing. Nobody can do what we do. Those guys can't do what we do. That startup will never do what we do. We're great at this. And the other side of that competency trap is I don't like to feel incompetent. If I'm really good at something, if we're really good at something, I like to keep doing that thing. I don't want to have to start over. I don't want to have to get myself in a world where I don't know what I'm doing. It doesn't feel good. We all have that kind of human weakness. So naming those things is the really critical exercise in box 2. And so what I want to do is actually use a case study here. Poor Blockbuster. We just keep picking on Blockbuster. But it's a perfect example. It's a perfect example of how this framework can be used. And so we all know how this story ended, right? We're all probably planning to binge Netflix tonight. I am, after a long day with the summit. So what if we could go back in time, all of us, get into the time machine and go back into Blockbuster's corporate headquarters maybe a decade and a half ago, and we were carrying this 3-box solution framework with us? What might we find, and then what might we do as good digital partners to them to help them think differently about what's going on? So you can sort of imagine, I'm making this up, but I believe it's probably true. What would their box 1 have looked like? The people in box 1 were thinking about these things. How do we shorten our store lines? People are getting impatient waiting in line. How do we improve supply? Everybody wants the hit. They show up on Friday night, Chinese food's getting cold in the car, and they can't find the movie that they came here for. So we've got to improve our supply. We need to find ways to incentivize our customers to get those videos back and make sure they're rewound. Do you remember that problem? How do we maximize the fine structure so that we can get the videos back and they're rewound and we don't have to do it for them? And then, by the way, we should start selling things like candy and popcorn so that we can get more share of wallet while people are in the store. That'd be great. We could have soda. We could do pizza coupons, all that stuff. So this is stuff that people in box 1 were working on and thinking about, I guarantee it. And they had clear bonuses and MBOs structured against these things, and they should have. That was their business. If somebody's not thinking about box 1 every day, the thing's going down. But I think what we could do if we go back in time is say, we're going to do a box 2 exercise with you. We're going to name some of your sacred beliefs. And we're going to challenge those things. So what might their sacred beliefs have been, whether they were spoken or unspoken? One of them clearly was, the internet's not going to affect our business. We're a retail outlet. People come to us, they rent videos, they go home. The internet's not going to be a big factor to us. People like coming to stores. It's fun. You walk around, you browse all these different movies. Movies get played on a machine. VCRs, DVDs are coming, they're cool. Blu-ray, we got to think about Blu-ray. That's a box 1 initiative. Licensing deals with Hollywood can't be changed. Hollywood sets the rules. We can't do anything about that. And movies can't be downloaded. They're way too big. They're way too big. So I'm sure that those were existing sacred beliefs, and there's probably a much longer list. But because those things existed, whether written or unwritten, and everyone was thinking about box 1, nobody was thinking about box 3, except Netflix, who accepted none of those things in box 2. They never believed any of those things for a moment. And so they were just working in the world of box 3. So Again, now we're in the Blockbuster boardroom and we're working with their leadership team, and we could take them through this exercise. And this is what I'm hoping you can be doing for your own business. Let's take those box 2 things and write them down. So you say the internet won't affect our business, but how might it? I'll assume you're right. It's never going to affect your business, but indulge me for a minute. What if it did? How could the internet possibly affect your business? Could we brainstorm some ideas? I know we could get them to brainstorm some ideas. I'm sure we could have gotten them to do that. You say people like coming to stores, but what if they don't? Do we really know that? Do we know how many people don't like coming to stores? What if people didn't have to come to the stores? Would there be a market for people who don't want to come to the video store on a Friday night? Maybe. Movies are played on a machine, but what if that's not always going to be true? What new technologies are emerging out there that might change that? Licensing deals can't be changed with Hollywood, but what if they could? And again, each one of these ideas, you can imagine sort of an hour or so of brainstorming on just, but how might it, you know? Let's just use our imaginations, let's get creative, and we don't have to act on any of it, but let's just go through the exercise and see if we can come up with some ideas. And then finally, movies can't be downloaded. I think the key question right there would have been, but how soon might that change? Surely, here in, pick a year, 2002, there's some brainiac out there smart enough that we could pay on an hourly basis to come in and give us a prediction of how soon people might actually be able to download a movie. When will the bandwidth be ready? Is it 10 years away? 5 years away? 15 years away? But if it's in that 10-year horizon, maybe we ought to actually have somebody start thinking about that. When someone downloads the movie, are they still going to come to the store? So we could take them through this exercise, and then what could they have done? What could Blockbuster have acted on? First, they could have formed a Box 3 team. And this is a big part of my message to you today. Once you've named those things, and the idea is, of all these possibilities on Box 2 questions, you still have to choose. No organization has the bandwidth or the resources to act on all these different things, but you have to rely on the collective expertise of your leaders and your talent to say, let's pick a couple of these and take them seriously and at least prove to ourselves that they're wrong or right. To do that, you have to form a Box 3 team who's only thinking about those things. And that's a critical part. Imagine now we're back in the Blockbuster boardroom, and we're talking about the movie download issue, and they get excited about it, and they think, you're right, movies might get downloaded someday. So we're going to have the guy who's dealing with supply chain and candy and popcorn, we're going to have him think about movie downloads too. So we're going to give Box 1 a Box 3 challenge. No chance. No chance. The gravitational pull of Box 1 is like a black hole. It is going to suck all the energy and time and mental bandwidth into it because it has to. Someone's got to be running the core. So that Box 3 team needs to be free to think about that and only that. We got to separate them from the core business. We have to make them immune to some of the limiting beliefs that exist in Box 2. And we've got to charge that team with working on these weak signals from the future. You guys, go think about downloadable movies. That's all I want you to think about, and I want you to report back to me in 90 days on the progress. And that's where the really important thing comes to incentivizing that team differently. If a Box 3 team is incentivized and evaluated just like everybody in Box 1, well, that's not very motivating. You almost don't want to be successful because you want Box 1 to win, and you don't want to be a pain in the neck to Box 1 if that's how you're getting evaluated and rewarded. So how do you incentivize that team differently? It could be about evidence. I think he makes a great point that Box 3 is about learning and not earning. Don't take a Box 3 team and give them an immediate revenue target. We see this all the time. A company has hired a new chief innovation officer. They're going great guns at digital. They're going to be working on these really cool ideas. The chief innovation officer has been given a $250 million bogey in 3 years. It's got to be accretive to earnings. It can't violate any regulatory things. It can't be too disruptive to operations. And by the way, you have no full-time resources. You're just going to have to beg and borrow from other teams. Right? Seeing heads nodding, you've seen this movie. So they have to be incentivized differently. So you're about learning and not earning. You have to hit milestones. You have to operate within our budget. We can't give you a blank check. We need to see evidence, even if that evidence is, you know what, there's nothing here. We did an experiment. We evaluated it. We think it's a dead end. That weak signal is not going to go anywhere. And then finally, I love this idea. He talks about visibly and purposely penalizing and punishing people that get in the way of box 3. And in his book, he uses a couple of great examples of leaders who literally did that, who made a visible example of someone who blocked a box 3 initiative from box 1. That's pretty gutsy. But I think it's an important idea to talk about. Because if you don't, if no one's thinking about box 3, I think Blockbuster, when we talk about 75% of the S&P disappearing within 10 years, it's going to be because of these kinds of dynamics. It's not going to be because the technology was no good. It's going to be because the human beings weren't able to adapt. We weren't able to change our thinking. We weren't able to let go of the past. We weren't able to get past our limiting sacred beliefs. That's the big challenge. So we do all this. Does it mean Blockbuster would have invented Netflix? No, I don't think so. But could Blockbuster have avoided extinction? Could they today be a credible competitor to Netflix? I think that's absolutely possible. They had a massive database of customers. They had an incredible supply chain in existence and solved. They had relationships with every Hollywood studio and production house. They had so much unfair advantage over Netflix, and they weren't able to act on any of it. It just went away. So they may not have been Netflix, but I think they'd probably still be around had they been able to embrace this kind of framework and go after transformation. So long story short, my point to you today is that in the midst of the most technology-driven time ever, we need to be more human than we've ever been. And what I mean is that we got to just acknowledge the fact that humans are fussy creatures. We don't like change. Adapting is hard. Given a choice between being someone else today and being who I was yesterday, I'm going to default to yesterday. It's just comfortable. I've got kids to raise. I've got bills to pay. I've got a lawn to mow. I don't want to have to go through the pains of completely forgetting everything I used to know and thinking totally different. So what we have to do, and what I like about this model, is if you recognize that humans struggle with this, I think one thing that is liberating to us as people is let's just name them. We don't have to act on anything yet, but let's just take one day and get really creative and attack these ideas. And then we can decide tomorrow whether we're going to move forward on any of them. We can choose which ones. But that starts to get people in a different kind of mindset. And so this simple 3-box solution, again, every business book is a simple idea. 3 columns on a page, folks. What's happening in your core business? Are you investing in digital transformation in that core? Because you have to. And you're going to be hearing some great conversation today about core, box 1, digital transformation innovation. That's amazing, and it has to happen. So what are you doing in box 1? Can you name anything that's happening in box 3 right now? And are you clear on if something's happening in box 3, do you know what box 2 idea it's trying to intentionally attack? And if not, I think that might be a risk. But has anyone written down the box 2 stuff? Those limiting beliefs, the list of things you could stop doing. That's where I think real creativity can start to break in. So those are the 3 boxes. And that's the end of my shtick of paleontology, science fiction, and psychology. And now I want us to learn from each other. So what we're going to do here for the next, we're good for 10 minutes, Ellie? Yeah, okay, there you are. Limited exercise, but what I want you to do is take a couple minutes and think about your box 2 within your organization. What is one thing that you could stop doing, or that you believe you should stop doing? Or what is one sacred belief that you think is prime for attack and needs to be challenged, needs to be named and called out?
It's on to think outside of the box. So I think we're moving in the right direction, but it's certainly.
But at times it feels like we're dragging people.
Yes, the idea that nonprofits